Commander Lee Hyun-woo stood at the observation deck of Titan Station and watched the alien ships approach through the orange haze of Saturn's largest moon. The massive vessels moved with the slow confidence of predators who knew their prey could not escape. Their dark hulls gleamed like wet stone against the star field, and their weapons remained silent for now. "Sir, the Hegemony fleet is requesting docking permission," said Captain Park So-young from behind him. Her voice carried the tension that everyone on the station felt when the aliens came calling. These visits were never social calls. Lee turned from the window and studied his security chief. Park was a small woman, but her cybernetic arm could crush steel, and her enhanced eyes missed nothing. She had survived 3 wars before joining his command, and he trusted her instincts more than his own sensors. "How many ships?" he asked. 12 heavy cruisers and the flagship," Park replied. "Admiral Vexathera is aboard the flagship personally." Lee felt his stomach tighten. When the Supreme Commander of the Third Fleet made personal visits, it meant trouble. The Hegemony controlled over 10,000 worlds, and their admirals did not waste time on routine inspections. "Grant them permission," Lee said after a moment. "Have Dr. Kim meet us in Conference Room 7. Full diplomatic protocol." Park nodded and spoke into her comm device. Lee watched her walk away and wondered if this would be another round of threats about humanity staying within their solar system. The quarantine protocol had kept his species trapped like animals in a cage for over 50 years. Dr. Kim Taemin arrived at the conference room before the aliens did. The xenobiologist looked nervous as he arranged his translation devices and cultural briefing materials. Kim was the only human on the station who could speak the Hegemony trade language fluently, and his knowledge of alien customs had prevented several diplomatic incidents. "Do we know what they want this time?" Kim asked as he calibrated his equipment. "Nothing good," Lee replied. He had learned to read the patterns in Hegemony behavior during his 20 years of command. This visit felt different from the others. The aliens had brought too many ships for a simple inspection. The conference room doors slid open and Admiral Vexathera entered with 6 guards. The Kethamari stood nearly 8 feet tall with scales that shifted from green to black depending on the light. Her yellow eyes studied the room like a hunter evaluating prey, and her forked tongue tasted the air constantly. "Commander Lee," Vexathera said in heavily accented standard. "We must speak." Lee gestured to the chairs around the polished metal table. The alien guards remained standing while Vexathera sat across from the humans. Her massive form made the reinforced chair creak ominously. "What brings you to Titan Station, Admiral?" Lee asked. Vexathera's tongue flicked out again. "Your species has become a problem," Dr. Kim leaned forward. "I'm not sure I understand. Humanity has followed all quarantine protocol requirements. We haven't left our solar system or attempted contact with other species without permission." The alien admiral's laugh sounded like rocks grinding together. "Your technology grows too quickly. Your population expands too fast. Your military becomes too strong." Lee felt the first flutter of real fear. In 50 years of containment, the Hegemony had never expressed concern about human development. Their official position was that humanity would be evaluated for galactic membership in another century or 2. "We pose no threat to the Hegemony," Lee said carefully. "Our ships can barely reach the outer planets." "Today, yes," Vexathera replied. "Tomorrow, you will build ships that can reach other stars. In 10 years, you will challenge our authority. In 50 years, you will be strong enough to resist us." The conference room fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Lee exchanged glances with Dr. Kim and saw his own growing dread reflected in the scientist's eyes. "What are you saying, Admiral?" Kim asked. Vexathera stood slowly. Her guards moved their hands closer to their weapons. "The Hegemony Council has reached a decision. Humanity will not be permitted to develop further." Lee's blood turned to ice. "You're talking about genocide." "We prefer the term population adjustment," the Admiral said with another grinding laugh. "Your species will be reduced to a manageable level. Perhaps 1% of current numbers will be preserved as a cultural curiosity." The words hit Lee like physical blows. 1% of humanity meant killing 7 billion people. Men, women, and children wiped out because they might someday become inconvenient for alien overlords. "The quarantine protocol guarantees our right to develop within our own system," Dr. Kim said desperately. You can't simply murder billions of sentient beings. Vexathara's eyes narrowed to golden slits. Watch us. She gestured to her guards, and they drew their weapons in one smooth motion. The energy rifles hummed with deadly power as they aimed at the humans around the table. Wait, Lee said, raising his hands. Let's discuss this rationally. Surely we can reach some accommodation. The time for discussion has ended, Vexathara replied. Your species' fate was decided the moment your scientists achieved fusion power. We simply delayed the inevitable. The first shot took Dr. Kim in the chest. The xenobiologist looked surprised for a split second before the energy beam burned through his body and left nothing but ash and smoke. Lee lunged forward, but Park was faster. Her cybernetic arm caught one guard by the throat and crushed his windpipe before the others could react. The security chief managed to activate the emergency alarm before 3 energy beams turned her into scattered atoms. Lee dove behind an overturned chair as more shots filled the air with deadly light. All hands, this is not a drill, Park's recorded voice echoed through the station speakers. We are under attack by hegemony forces. Implement Protocol 7 immediately, Lee. Heard the distinctive whine of the station's defensive systems coming online. Protocol 7 meant total war. Every human on Titan Station would fight to the death rather than surrender. The conference room doors burst open and more aliens poured inside. Lee recognized the black armor of hegemony shock troops as they spread through the room with military precision. Their weapons swept every corner looking for surviving humans. Through the chaos, Lee heard the sounds of battle echoing from other parts of the station. Energy weapons fired in sustained bursts, while human projectile guns answered with their distinctive crack and boom. Explosions shook the deck plates as someone triggered demolition charges. Admiral Vexathara stood in the center of the carnage and spoke into her communicator. Begin Phase 2. Target the civilian sectors first. Make sure the children die slowly, so the adults understand the price of resistance. Something snapped inside Lee's mind when he heard those words. The careful diplomacy and political restraint that had defined his career evaporated like morning frost under a blowtorch. These creatures were not here to conquer or enslave. They were here to murder every human being on the station, including innocent children who had never hurt anyone. Lee's hand found the emergency axe mounted on the wall behind him. The tool was designed for cutting through damaged bulkheads during emergencies, but its titanium edge could cut through more than metal. He waited until Vexathara turned her back and then exploded from his hiding place. The Admiral heard him coming and spun around with inhuman speed. Her claws raked across his face, leaving deep furrows that spurted blood. Lee ignored the pain and swung the axe with all his strength. The blade bit deep into the alien's neck, and black blood sprayed across the conference table. Vexathara tried to scream, but only managed a wet, gurgling sound. Lee yanked the axe free and swung again. The second blow separated the Admiral's head from her shoulders in a fountain of alien gore. The hegemony guards stared in shock as their commander's body toppled to the deck. Lee picked up the severed head by one of its horn-like protrusions and slammed it down on the conference table hard enough to crack the metal surface. Now, Lee said, wiping blood from his eyes. Shall we discuss terms? Lieutenant Colonel Yoon Ji-hai crawled through the ventilation shaft with her portable transmitter clutched against her chest. The device was her only hope of getting word to Earth about what had happened on Titan Station. Behind her, she could hear the aliens systematically searching every room for survivors. The communications officer had been in the primary control center when Admiral Vexathara's forces began their attack. She watched helplessly as her entire team was cut down by energy weapons before managing to escape through an emergency hatch. Now, the fate of humanity might depend on whether she could reach the long-range transmitter array. Ji-hai pressed her ear against a ventilation grate and listened carefully. The corridor beyond seemed quiet, but she had learned not to trust appearances. The hegemony soldiers moved like ghosts when they wanted to remain undetected. She carefully removed the grate and dropped into an empty hallway. The walls were scorched with weapon burns, and the air smelled of burned electronics and death. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows that made her own shadow look like a monster. The transmitter array was 3 levels up and halfway across the station. Ji-hai had memorized the route during evacuation drills, but those exercises had never included alien death squads hunting for survivors. Every step could be her last. She reached the first intersection and paused to check her portable scanner. The device showed multiple heat signatures moving through nearby sections, but none in her immediate path. Ji-Hai took a deep breath and sprinted across the open space. A maintenance shaft led to the next level. As she climbed the narrow ladder, Ji-Hai heard voices speaking in the clicking language of the Kethmari. She couldn't understand the words, but their tone was casual, almost bored. To them, this was just another day at work. The second-level corridors were wider and better lit. Ji-Hai had to be more careful here because there were fewer places to hide. She pressed herself against the wall and moved slowly toward her destination. Through an observation window, she saw something that made her blood freeze. A group of alien soldiers had gathered in the station's main plaza, where families lived in small apartments. They were herding human civilians into groups and executing them with methodical efficiency. Ji-Hai watched a young mother try to shield her infant son from the weapons fire. The energy beam vaporized both of them in an instant. An elderly man who could barely walk was shot down while trying to reach his fallen grandson. Children cried for parents who would never answer again. The communications officer forced herself to turn away and continue moving. She could not help those people, but she might be able to prevent this from happening to billions more on Earth. Her portable transmitter had enough power for one burst transmission if she could reach the main array. The third level was eerily quiet. Ji-Hai's footsteps echoed in the empty corridors as she made her way toward the communications center. The silence was somehow worse than the sounds of battle had been. She reached the transmitter room and found the door standing open. Inside, the sophisticated equipment hummed with power, but all the human operators were gone. Ji-Hai tried not to look too closely at the burn marks on the walls that showed where people had died. Her portable device connected to the main array without difficulty. The hegemony forces had not bothered to disable human communication systems because they assumed no one would survive to use them. It was a mistake that would cost them dearly. Ji-Hai activated the emergency broadcast protocol and aimed her personal recorder at the main display screen. The device would transmit everything it captured directly to Earth through the quantum entanglement network that connected all human colonies. She took a moment to compose herself and then began speaking. This is Lieutenant Colonel Yoon Ji-Hai of Titan Station. At 1400 hours local time, the station was attacked by hegemony forces under the command of Admiral Vexithara. This was not a military action. It was an attempted genocide. Ji-Hai paused and checked her scanner again. Still no movement in the nearby corridors, but that could change quickly. She continued her broadcast while transferring recorded footage from the station's security systems. The aliens came under false pretenses, claiming to conduct a routine inspection. Instead, they began systematically executing every human on the station, including women, children, and unarmed civilians. Their stated goal is the elimination of 99% of humanity. The security footage showed the massacre in Conference Room 7, where Commander Lee had confronted Admiral Vexithara. Ji-Hai's hands shook as she watched Dr. Kim die and Captain Park sacrifice herself to sound the alarm. But then something incredible happened on the recording. Commander Lee emerged from behind an overturned chair with an emergency axe in his hands. The man who had spent 20 years negotiating with aliens suddenly became something primal and terrifying. The camera captured every detail as Lee buried his axe in the Admiral's neck. It showed him severing the alien's head and throwing it onto the conference table like a piece of meat. Most importantly, it recorded his words as he stood covered in alien blood and asked to discuss terms. The commander's actions represent humanity's response to unprovoked genocide, Ji-Hai said into her recorder. We did not start this war, but we will finish it. Any alien forces approaching Earth or human colonies will be considered hostile and engaged with extreme prejudice. She uploaded everything to the quantum transmitter and watched the progress bar creep toward completion. The data burst would reach Earth in minutes, and from there it would spread to every human settlement in the solar system. On Earth, General Choi Min-ho was reviewing quarterly defense reports when his aide burst into the office without knocking. The young officer's face was pale and his hands shook as he handed over a datapad. Sir, you need to see this immediately, the aide said. Choi took the device and watched Ji-Hai's transmission with growing horror. The footage of civilian massacres made his stomach turn, but the image of Lee throwing the Admiral's head onto the table filled him with something else entirely. It was rage pure and undiluted. "Get me the president," Choi said in a voice like winter steel, "and activate the Emergency Defense Council. We're going to war." The transmission spread through human space like wildfire. On Mars colony, workers stopped their mining operations to watch the footage on their helmet displays. The orbital shipyards around Jupiter fell silent as construction crews absorbed the implications of what they were seeing. But instead of panic, something unexpected happened. Humanity began to unite in a way it had never done before. The massacre at Titan Station became a rallying cry that transcended national boundaries and political differences. President Nam Gi-woo addressed the species 12 hours after receiving Ji-Hai's transmission. His words were broadcast to every human settlement and recorded for posterity. The message was simple, but it would echo through history. "For 50 years we have lived as prisoners in our own solar system," the president said. "We accepted the quarantine protocol because we believed the hegemony wanted peace. Today we learned the truth. They never intended to grant us freedom. They always planned to murder us when we became inconvenient." Nam paused and looked directly into the camera. Behind him stood the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the heads of every major government on Earth. For the first time in human history, the species spoke with one voice. The aliens made a mistake when they chose genocide over coexistence. They revealed their true nature and freed us from any obligation to show them mercy. From this moment forward, humanity considers itself at war with the galactic hegemony. The president's next words would be carved into monuments across human space. "We reject the quarantine protocol. We reject alien authority over human affairs. We will build ships that can reach the stars, and we will use them to hunt down every being responsible for the Titan Station massacre." Meanwhile, on Titan Station, Ji-Hai heard footsteps approaching the communications room. Her transmission was complete, but she knew the aliens would find her soon. The portable transmitter had enough power for one more burst message. She aimed the recorder at herself and spoke quickly. "This is my final transmission. The footage of Commander Lee's actions is spreading across human space. The aliens wanted to eliminate us quietly, but instead they have awakened something they should have left sleeping." The footsteps were getting closer. Ji-Hai could hear the distinctive clicking of hegemony soldiers communicating with each other. She had maybe 30 seconds before they found her. "Tell my family I died fighting," she said into the recorder. "Tell them the monsters made a mistake when they thought fear would make us surrender. Humans don't surrender. We adapt. We overcome. We survive." The door burst open just as she triggered the final transmission. Energy beams filled the room with deadly light, but the message was already racing toward Earth at faster than light speed. Lieutenant Colonel Yoon Ji-Hai died with a smile on her face, knowing that her sacrifice had given humanity the warning it needed. The aliens had won the battle for Titan Station, but they had lost something far more important. They had lost the element of surprise, and now 7 billion humans knew exactly what kind of enemy they were facing. Dr. Lim Hae-won stood in the wreckage of a hegemony cruiser and marveled at how primitive their technology actually was. 6 months ago, she had been designing improved life support systems for civilian transports. Today, she was reverse engineering alien faster-than-light drives with the focused intensity of someone who knew her species' survival depended on her success. The cruiser had been shot down during humanity's first retaliatory strike against hegemony forces near Neptune. Admiral Kang Dong-soo's fleet had caught the aliens completely off guard with tactics that no civilized species would ever consider using. "The power coupling is almost identical to our fusion reactors," Lim said to her assistant as they examined the alien drive core. "They just use a different catalyst to initiate the space-folding effect." Her team had been working around the clock since the Titan Station massacre, analyzing every piece of hegemony technology they could recover. The results were both encouraging and terrifying. Encouraging because the aliens were not technologically superior to humanity. Terrifying because that meant their control of the galaxy was based on something else entirely. "Doctor, we're getting some interesting readings from the navigation computer," called one of her technicians from across the ship's bridge. "It looks like they have detailed maps of the entire local galactic arm." Lim hurried over to examine the data. The navigation system contained coordinates for thousands of star systems, along with detailed information about inhabited worlds and military installations. It was an intelligence goldmine that would give humanity targets for the war that everyone knew was coming, but buried in the data files, Lim found something that made her blood run cold. The navigation computer contained records of other species that had been eliminated by the hegemony over the past 50,000 years. Hundreds of civilizations had been quietly erased from existence when they became inconvenient. "My God," she whispered as she scrolled through the casualty reports. "They've been doing this forever." The files showed a pattern that repeated across millennia. A promising species would develop advanced technology and begin exploring their local region of space. The hegemony would make contact under the pretense of peaceful first contact and establish quarantine protocols for the species' own protection. Then, when the species became too advanced or too numerous, the hegemony would stage an incident to justify military intervention. The records called it population adjustment, but the reality was systematic genocide designed to eliminate any potential rivals. Humanity was just the latest target in a campaign of extermination that stretched back to the dawn of galactic civilization. The hegemony maintained their control not through superior technology, but through the ruthless elimination of anyone who might challenge them. Lim immediately transmitted her findings to Earth, where Admiral Kang was preparing humanity's first interstellar fleet. The grizzled naval officer had spent his entire career fighting pirates and smugglers in the outer solar system. Now he faced the task of taking human ships into enemy territory for the first time in species history. "How long until the new drives are ready?" Kang asked during their secure video conference. "We can have prototypes installed in 6 ships within the week," Lim replied. "The technology is surprisingly simple once you understand the underlying principles. The aliens seem to have been using the same basic design for thousands of years." Kang nodded grimly. "That suggests they haven't faced serious opposition in a very long time. Good. We're going to give them a crash course in human military doctrine." The Admiral had been studying historical warfare since receiving the Titan station footage. Human conflicts had produced tactical innovations that were unknown to species that had lived in enforced peace for millennia. Concepts like asymmetric warfare and combined arms operations were completely foreign to the hegemony military. Captain Bae Sungmin listened to the briefing from the cockpit of his newly modified fighter craft. The young pilot had volunteered for the first interstellar strike mission, despite knowing it was essentially a suicide run. His fighter squadron would escort the fleet to Proxima Centauri, where intelligence suggested the hegemony maintained a major mining operation. "Remember, the enemy has numerical superiority, but they're not expecting us," Admiral Kang said over the comm channel. "Every engagement in human history has shown that surprise and aggression can overcome larger forces. We're going to hit them hard and fast before they know what's happening." The 6 prototype ships activated their new FTL drives simultaneously. Space folded around them in ways that human eyes had never seen before as they crossed impossible distances in seconds. When they emerged from hyperspace, the crews found themselves in an alien star system for the first time in human history. Proxima Centauri blazed red in the view screen as sensors detected the massive mining platforms orbiting the star. Hegemony. Ships moved between the installations with the lazy confidence of predators who had never known real threat. They were about to learn what it meant to face humanity at war. "All fighters launch," Admiral Kang ordered. "Target their command ships first. If they can't coordinate, they can't fight effectively." Bae's fighters screamed away from the fleet carrier with 11 other craft behind him. The aliens had detected their arrival by now, but they were reacting with the sluggish responses of beings who had never fought a real war. Their ships began turning toward the human fleet, but they moved like cargo haulers instead of warships. "Enemy fighters launching," called Bae's wingman over the comm. "Looks like 2 squadrons incoming." Bae studied the alien craft through his targeting system and grinned fiercely. The hegemony fighters were larger and more heavily armed than human ships, but they flew in rigid formations that any Academy cadet would recognize as obsolete. They had never faced opponents who used unpredictable tactics and individual initiative. The 2 forces met in a swirling dogfight that stretched across millions of cubic kilometers of space. Bae rolled his fighter through a series of maneuvers. That would have been impossible for the larger alien craft to follow. His weapons locked onto an enemy ship and fired a burst that tore through its armor like tissue paper. "Holy shit, they can't turn worth a damn," called another pilot as he destroyed a second alien fighter. "It's like fighting cargo shuttles." "Dai," Human pilots had trained for years against each other in ruthless combat exercises that pushed both men and machines to their absolute limits. Every engagement was a life-or-death struggle that forced constant innovation and adaptation. The aliens had apparently never needed to develop such skills. Within minutes, the entire hegemony fighter screen was destroyed without losing a single human craft. Bay led his squadron toward the mining platforms where energy weapons were beginning to track their approach. The installations were heavily defended, but their gunners had never faced targets that moved with human unpredictability. Meanwhile, Admiral Kang's capital ships closed with the enemy fleet using a formation that would have been recognized by naval commanders from any period of human history. The hegemony ships tried to respond, but their captains were clearly uncertain about how to deal with opponents who refused to follow established tactical doctrine. "Target their engines first," Kang ordered. "Disable them, and they become sitting targets." The human ships concentrated their fire with surgical precision that reflected centuries of naval warfare experience. Each shot was carefully aimed to achieve maximum effect rather than simply overwhelming the enemy with volume of fire. It was an approach that the aliens clearly did not expect. One by one, the hegemony ships found themselves crippled and helpless as human marines prepared to board them. The aliens had never developed effective small unit tactics because they had never needed to fight boarding actions against determined opponents. Captain Oh Sung-ho led the first boarding party through the airlock of a disabled hegemony cruiser. The Marine officer had served in 3 different colonial conflicts and knew how to fight in confined spaces. His men moved through the alien ship like a force of nature, overwhelming defenders who had been trained for ceremonial duties rather than real combat. "Bridge secured," O reported after his squad captured the ship's command center. "Alien crew is requesting permission to surrender. It was humanity's first victory in interstellar space, and it had been achieved with minimal losses." The mining operation was completely destroyed, and dozens of alien ships had been captured or eliminated. More importantly, the engagement had proven that human military doctrine was vastly superior to anything the hegemony could field. But the real victory was psychological. For the first time in 50,000 years, a species had struck back at the hegemony and won. The footage of human marines herding alien prisoners would spread through the galaxy just as the Titan Station massacre had spread through human space. Dr. Lim watched the battle reports from her laboratory on Earth and felt a grim satisfaction. Her reverse-engineered FTL drives had performed flawlessly and given humanity the tools it needed to take the war to the enemy. But she knew this was just the beginning. "How soon can we have 50 ships equipped with the new drives?" Admiral Kang asked during their post-battle briefing. 3 months, Lim replied. "Maybe 2 if we can get more manufacturing capacity allocated to the project." "Do it," Kang said. Major Han Yu-jin crouched behind a fallen statue on the memorial world of Kethvar Prime and tried to comprehend the scale of what she was seeing. The entire planet was a graveyard stretching from horizon to horizon, filled with the preserved remains of civilizations that had dared to challenge hegemony authority. Her intelligence unit had been investigating hegemony records for 8 months since humanity's first interstellar victories. What they discovered buried in classified archives was evidence of systematic genocide spanning 50,000 years. Hundreds of species had been eliminated when they became inconvenient for the galactic order. Colonel, this section contains the Velthari Empire, called one of her specialists from across the memorial field. According to the records, they were eliminated 12,000 years ago for developing quantum computing technology. Han moved through the rows of crystalline monuments that held the genetic patterns and cultural artifacts of dead civilizations. Each monument represented millions or billions of individual beings who had been murdered for the crime of technological advancement. The Velthari had been a silicon-based species that achieved faster-than-light travel centuries before first contact with the hegemony. Their quantum computers could process information at speeds that made even advanced AI systems look primitive. They had been eliminated in a 3-day campaign that the hegemony records described as a minor police action. "Major, we're getting movement on the perimeter sensors," reported Sergeant Kim from his position near their landing craft. "Looks like hegemony patrol ships approaching fast." Han activated her comm unit and spoke quickly to Colonel Oh Sung-ho, who was leading the main assault on the planet's administrative center. The Marine officer had been pushing deeper into hegemony territory for months, following intelligence leads about the memorial worlds. "Colonel, we need immediate extraction," Han said. "We've found what we came for, but we're about to have company." O's voice crackled through the static-filled channel. "Copy that, Major. Hold position for 10 minutes, and we'll have birds in the air." Han looked around at her team and saw the same grim determination that had carried humanity through 8 months of interstellar warfare. These people had volunteered for the most dangerous intelligence missions in human history, because they knew the fate of their species depended on understanding their enemy. The memorial world contained records of over 300 extinct civilizations. Each one had followed the same tragic pattern of development, contact, quarantine, and elimination. The hegemony had refined their genocide techniques over millennia until the process became as routine as maintaining stellar navigation charts. "Sergeant, how long until those patrol ships reach us?" Han asked. 6 minutes at current approach speed," Kim replied while checking his rifle. "But if they're anything like the ships we fought at Proxima, they won't be expecting ground resistance." The human intelligence team had learned to exploit hegemony weaknesses during their deep reconnaissance missions. The aliens had superior numbers and better logistics, but they lacked the tactical flexibility that came from fighting real wars against competent opponents. Han's portable computer finished downloading the memorial world's central database just as the first hegemony fighters screamed overhead. The aircraft were sleek and powerful, but they flew in predictable search patterns that any guerrilla fighter would have recognized as inadequate. "Contact," called one of her specialists as energy beams began chewing up the ground around there. "Position." Multiple infantry squads moving in from the north. Han activated her tactical display and studied the enemy deployment. The hegemony troops were advancing in textbook formations that would have been effective against conventional opponents. Unfortunately for them, humans had stopped fighting conventional wars centuries ago. "Fall back to position 3, she ordered. "Let them come to us where we can control the engagement." The intelligence team moved through the memorial field with practiced efficiency, using the monuments themselves for cover. The crystalline structures were harder than steel and provided excellent protection against energy weapons. Colonel O's Marine units had learned urban warfare in the slums of Earth's megacities, where every building could hide an enemy and every street corner could conceal an ambush. The aliens had never faced opponents who used their environment as a weapon. Han's team reached their fallback position just as the hegemony infantry caught up with them. The aliens advanced with the mechanical precision of troops who had never fought against resourceful opponents. They expected humans to stand and fight like civilized beings, instead of disappearing into cover and striking from unexpected angles. The first alien squad walked into a carefully prepared kill zone where Han's specialists had positioned themselves to create overlapping fields of fire. Human weapons cracked with sharp reports that echoed between the monuments as energy beams answered from the advancing troops. "Target their officers first," Han ordered over the tactical channel. "Without leadership, they'll fall apart." Her team had studied hegemony military doctrine during the long voyage to the memorial world. The aliens relied heavily on centralized command structures that made them vulnerable to leadership decapitation. Remove their officers and the troops became confused and ineffective. Sergeant Kim's rifle found an alien commander and dropped the creature with a single shot to its center mass. The other members of that squad immediately began looking around for orders that would never come. It was exactly the reaction that human intelligence had predicted. "Second squad down," reported one of Han's snipers. "These guys really don't know how to fight without someone telling them what to do." The engagement continued for 20 minutes before Colonel O's extraction team arrived in modified assault shuttles. The Marine aircraft dove from orbit with their weapons blazing as they cleared landing zones near Han's position. "Move, move, move!" O's voice barked over the comm as his Marines deployed from the shuttles. "We've got 5 minutes before their reinforcements arrive." Han's team sprinted toward the extraction point while O's Marines provided covering fire. The colonel led from the front, as always, using his enhanced combat armor to absorb energy weapon hits that would have killed unprotected humans. The extraction shuttles lifted off just as hegemony reinforcements arrived in the form of heavy cruisers. Dropping from orbit, the human aircraft disappeared into hyperspace before the alien ships could lock onto them with their targeting systems. Back aboard the fleet carrier, Defiance Han transmitted her findings to Admiral Kang and the other senior commanders. The Memorial World database contained detailed records of every genocide committed by the hegemony over the past 50 millennia. They've been systematically eliminating every species that shows potential for challenging their authority, Han reported during the intelligence briefing. The pattern is always the same. First contact, quarantine protocols, development monitoring, and then elimination when the species becomes inconvenient. Admiral Kong studied the data with the expression of a man who had seen too much death and suffering. The veteran officer had spent months fighting his way through hegemony space while learning the true scope of alien atrocities. "How many civilizations are we talking about?" Kang asked. "Over 300 confirmed extinctions," Han replied. "The database suggests there may be thousands more that were eliminated before the current record-keeping system was established." The conference room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity was not fighting to protect their own species anymore. They were fighting for the memory of billions of beings who had been murdered simply for existing. "There's something else," Han continued. "The database contains references to the original apex species that founded the hegemony. They call themselves the first ones, and according to these records, their leader has been in stasis for over 20,000 years. Fleet Admiral Song Yunji leaned forward with interest. The overall commander of human space forces had been coordinating attacks across multiple sectors while searching for the hegemony's true leadership. "What do we know about this leader?" Song asked. Han activated her display and showed an image that made everyone in the room recoil in shock. The creature looked like something from humanity's darkest nightmares, with multiple heads and appendages that seemed to shift and writhe even in the still photograph. "His name is Supreme Overlord Thexqualon, and he's apparently the last surviving member of the species that created the hegemony," Han said. "According to the records, he personally designed the genocide protocols that have been used against hundreds of civilizations." The database revealed that the hegemony was not what it appeared to be on the surface. It had been created by an ancient predator species that wanted to ensure they would never face competition from younger civilizations. The current member species were essentially servants who carried out orders from their sleeping master. "So we're not fighting the real enemy," Admiral Kang said grimly. "We're fighting their servants while the actual architects of genocide sleep safely in their bunkers." Song studied the tactical displays that showed human forces advancing through hegemony space. Her fleets had won dozens of engagements against alien forces, but she now realized they had only been fighting the outer defenses of a much larger threat. "Where is this Thexqualon located?" she asked. President Nam Gi-woo stood at the viewport of his transport ship and watched the ruins of the former hegemony capital world turning slowly beneath him. 1 year ago, this planet had been the center of galactic civilization, commanding the loyalty of 10,000 species across the galaxy. Today it was a monument to what happened when someone tried to murder human children. The massive orbital stations that once coordinated hegemony fleets hung dead in space, their hulls cracked open like broken eggs. The planet's surface showed the scars of orbital bombardment, where human forces had methodically destroyed every military installation and government facility. "Mr. President, the remaining hegemony leadership is assembled in Conference Room Alpha," reported his aide Captain Lee Min-jung. "Fleet Admiral Song is standing by with the evidence packages." Nam nodded and straightened his formal diplomatic uniform. Today he would dictate terms of surrender to the species that had ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years. It was a moment that would be remembered as long as humans existed. The president made his way through corridors lined with human marines standing at attention. These men and women had fought their way across hundreds of light years to reach this moment. Many of their comrades had died in the campaign against the hegemony, but their sacrifice had saved countless future civilizations from extinction. Conference Room Alpha had been the heart of hegemony power, where Supreme Overlord Thexqualon had issued orders for the genocide of entire species. The ancient chamber was built from materials that could withstand the passage of millennia, but human weapons had proven more durable than alien architecture. Fleet Admiral Song Yunji was waiting beside a polished metal table that bore fresh scars from recent battles. The naval commander had personally led the assault on the galactic core, where Thexqualon had hidden in his stasis bunker for 20,000 years. "How did the final battle go?" Nam asked quietly. Song's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held the satisfaction of someone who had settled a long overdue debt. Colonel O's Marines breached the stasis facility yesterday. Thexaqualan chose to fight rather than surrender. The colonel ended the engagement with his bare hands. The president felt a grim satisfaction at those words. The architect of 50,000 years of genocide had finally faced justice at the hands of a human soldier. It was a fitting end for a creature that had ordered the deaths of billions of innocent beings. And the heads? Nam asked. Song gestured to a display case sitting on the conference table. Inside were the preserved heads of every hegemony admiral who had participated in the Titan Station massacre. They had been collected during humanity's year-long campaign of vengeance that had taken human forces to every corner of the galaxy. All accounted for, Mr. President. Song replied. Admiral Vexathera's head holds the place of honor, but we made sure to collect the entire command structure that authorized the attack. The conference room doors opened, and the surviving members of the Hegemony Council entered under heavy guard. These beings had once commanded the resources of 10,000 worlds, but now they moved with the broken shuffling of defeated enemies. Counselor Veltaran led the group with his crystalline form, dim and fractured from stress. The Silthari diplomat had been one of the few hegemony leaders to advocate for negotiation rather than continued warfare. His species had learned too late that humans did not forgive attempted genocide, President Nam Veltaran said in heavily accented standard. We are prepared to discuss terms for ending this conflict. Nam took his seat at the head of the conference table and gestured for the aliens to sit. The symbolism was unmistakable as the former rulers of the galaxy took their places like students before a teacher. Before we begin, let me make something clear, Nam said in a voice that carried across the chamber like winter wind. This is not a negotiation. You will listen to our terms and accept them completely or face the consequences of continued resistance. The president activated the display case and watched the aliens recoil as they saw the severed heads of their former commanders. The collection represented more than military trophies. It was a promise that humanity had not forgotten the massacre that started this war. 1 year ago, your forces murdered innocent civilians on Titan Station, including women, and children who posed no threat to anyone, Nam continued. Your Admiral Vexathara personally ordered the execution of human children to send a message about the consequences of resistance. Veltaran's form grew even dimmer as he absorbed the implications of the display. President Nam, we understand that mistakes were made during the initial contact protocols. Perhaps we can discuss compensation for the families affected. Nam's laugh held no humor whatsoever. Mistakes. You call the planned genocide of 7 billion human beings a mistake. You call the systematic extermination of 300 species over 50,000 years a mistake. Fleet Admiral Song activated her data projector and filled the room with images from the memorial worlds. The evidence that Major Han's intelligence teams had recovered showed the true scope of hegemony atrocities across galactic history. These are the terms, Nam said as he stood and began pacing around the table. First, the galactic hegemony is hereby dissolved. Every species that was forced to join your empire is now free to govern themselves as they see fit. Several of the alien counselors began to protest, but Nam silenced them with a gesture. Second, all former hegemony military leaders will surrender themselves for trial on charges of genocide and crimes against sapient life. The trials will be conducted by representatives of the species you attempted to eliminate. Veltaran's voice took on a pleading tone. President Nam, surely you understand that such trials would result in mass executions. Many of our military leaders were simply following orders from their superiors. Following orders, Nam repeated with cold fury. The same defense that war criminals have used throughout human history. It was not accepted then, and it will not be accepted now. The president continued his pacing as he outlined terms that would reshape galactic civilization. Third, the memorial worlds will be converted into educational centers where future generations can learn about the cost of tyranny. Every species in the galaxy will send representatives to study the evidence of your crimes. Song added her own contribution to the proceedings. Fourth, all former hegemony worlds will pay reparations for the civilizations they helped destroy. The payment will take the form of resources and labor to rebuild worlds damaged during your reign. The alien counselors sat in stunned silence as they realized the scope of what was being demanded. They had expected harsh terms, but not the complete dismantling of everything their civilization had built over 50 millennia. These terms are impossible, protested another counselor whose species Nam did not recognize. You're asking us to destroy our entire way of life? Nam stopped pacing and fixed the alien with a stare that had made hardened diplomats uncomfortable during his political career. Your way of life was built on the bones of murdered children. It deserves to be destroyed. The president returned to his seat and leaned back with the casual confidence of someone who held all the power in the room. However, we are not interested in ruling over you the way you ruled over others. The galaxy needs a new form of government based on cooperation rather than domination. Song activated another display that showed the proposed structure of the new Galactic Federation. Every species will have equal representation regardless of their technological level or military strength. Decisions will be made by democratic consensus rather than imperial decree. Veltaran studied the organizational charts with growing amazement. You're giving up the chance to rule the galaxy after defeating us militarily. Why would you choose to share power with species that cannot match your capabilities? Nam's answer reflected the hard-earned wisdom of a species that had learned the cost of unchecked power through bloody experience. Because ruling through fear and oppression always leads to rebellion and war. We've seen what happens when one species tries to control all the others, and we refuse to repeat your mistakes. The president stood again and walked to the viewport where he could see human ships patrolling the space around the former capital, World. The new Federation will be headquartered at Titan Station after it's rebuilt. The place where your empire began its final campaign will become the birthplace of a new era in galactic civilization. Song provided the practical details of the transition process. Former hegemony species will be given 5 years to establish democratic governments and prepare for Federation membership. Human forces will provide security during the transition period, but we will not interfere in internal affairs. The alien counselors spent several hours reviewing the terms and asking questions about implementation details. Nam patiently answered their concerns while making it clear that the fundamental requirements were not negotiable. What guarantees do we have that humanity will honor these agreements? Asked Veltaran during a break in the proceedings. Nam gestured to the display case containing the severed heads of hegemony admirals. The same guarantee you had when you tried to exterminate us. The knowledge that breaking faith with humans carries consequences that you cannot survive. The formal surrender ceremony took place at sunset on the capital world, with representatives from dozens of species in